How's it going, guys? I'm Mike Dwyer from the Bunker Recordings and BetterMixes.com, and I know a lot of you guys are recording in your home studios, so you're probably recording drums in a small, less than ideal room that probably doesn't have a ton of natural reverb in it. So I want to show you how I use drum room samples to get massive drum sounds, even if I don't have a room mic or if the room mic doesn't sound good. I talked about this briefly in an older video called Top 5 Reasons to Use Drum Samples, but I was just mixing a track recently where I had to use this technique. So I figured I'd go a little more in depth for you guys and show you how I used it in a real world situation. So first, let's take a listen to our drums without the room samples so we can see what we're starting with. So it sounds pretty good, but it's obviously pretty tight and dry. And this song is a little bit slower and has a lot of space in the arrangement. So to me, it was really calling to have a big, roomy, open drum sound. Now, if you've seen my video called How to Create a Fake Drum Room Sound, you'll know I sometimes send the overheads and the close mics to a reverb, which I then shape and compress to try to make it sound like a room mic. But in this case, the close mics didn't sound fantastic from the start, and the overheads, which are usually the basis of that trick, really didn't have much kick or snare in them. And there were also some weird editing artifacts that I didn't want to compound by using that as the basis of my fake room mics. So in this case, I decided to use drum samples to fix the problem. So if we look at these 5 tracks here, these are duplicates of the kick, the snare, and the 3 tom mics. Then on each of them, I have a gate, which is just gating it super, super tight, cutting out any bleed so that I can get cleaner triggers and less missed triggers. And then I have Stephen Slate trigger. So here I'm using some samples from my personal sample pack, which you can find over at bettermixes.com. And in this case on the snare, I'm using the garage snare and the riot snare. But the key is that I'm just using the room mic sample. Now, a lot of drum sample packs will come with some kind of room mic sample. It's not just mine that have it. I know the Stephen Slate ones that come with Trigger have room samples, and the guys over at Get Good Drums and Room Sound both include separate room mics with their drum samples as well. So there's a pretty good chance that you have something that'll work for this. If you don't, and the samples you have are already pre-blended, then you might want to consider picking up a pack from one of those companies I mentioned, because they're really, really useful to have. I'll often even use them and use this trick when mixing tracks that do have room mics, if the room mics just don't have quite enough kick or snare in them or whatever. But anyway, let's throw all these faders up here and listen to just these 5 tracks, which would be our fake room, basically. So sounds pretty good. Sounds like a room mic if there were no cymbals being played. Now, you might be thinking, can't I just send all my close mics or my regular drum samples to a reverb and get more or less the same effect? And you can, but a lot of the time that requires a lot more work to get it sounding realistic. I mean, these are the sounds of real drums being played in my live room, being picked up by real microphones. You can get something pretty good with reverb, but like I said, it takes a lot of tweaking, and ultimately, this is the real thing. So let's bring these faders back down, and then we're going to sneak them in the context of the drum mix and get them sitting where we like them. So right around there is sounding good to me. As you can see, we can push it really far to get a super, super roomy sound. And unlike doing that with reverb, it doesn't sound fake because it's real drum room mics. So from there, you can tweak the volume of each of these individually. As you can see, I have my toms quite a bit lower than my kick and snare. And actually my kick is peaking much lower than my snare. So we're adding in the most snare room sound, and then just a bit of the toms and kick. But obviously you can tweak that however you want. If you want a super, super roomy kick or super, super roomy toms, you can just crank those up. Now my samples I'm using here are already pre-processed how I like them, but if the room samples you're using are much more natural sounding, then what you could do is send all of these tracks to a aux track, and then from there you could EQ and compress this just like you would real room mics. But like I said, in this case, I already have them sounding how I like them, so that step isn't necessary. So I'm just going to delete that and send these back to my drum bus. So from here, by having all the room samples separate and grouped together like this, or bus to an aux track if you want to do more processing on it, when it comes time to do automation, I can just treat this exactly like I would a room mic. So for instance, I might want to automate up the room mics in the chorus, and then maybe in the verse, bring them down quite a bit for a drier sound, something like that. So just like that, I can very easily do that. As opposed to if I was just using pre-blended drum samples, then anytime I would automate my snare up, I would also be automating the snare room up, which might not be what I want. This gives me much more control over it. So let's just check this out one more time with and without it. And I'll play with the level a little bit just so you can see how far we can push it. So I hope you guys found this video helpful. If you did, be sure to leave a thumbs up and subscribe. And head on over to bettermixes.com to grab a free copy of my Ultimate EQ cheat sheet. And if you're in need of some new drum samples to try this technique out, feel free to check out my drum sample packs while you're there.